The second speaker for this third plenary session that we have today is Professor Nirmala Menon. Before I hand over this space, I'll give a brief introduction of Professor Menon. Professor Menon is a chair professor at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology in Indore, where she leads the Digital Humanities and Publishing Research Group and serves as chair of the JPN National Center of Excellence in Humanities. She is also an affiliate research professor with the University of Oxford and currently a Fulbright Fellow with Northeastern University, Boston for the year 2025-26. Her research spans interdisciplinary areas such as post-colonial studies, digital humanities, and multilingual scholarly publishing, with a sustained focus on decolonizing knowledge infrastructures. Professor Menon is the author of Migrant Identities of Creole Cosmopolitans, published from Peter Lang, and Remapping the Post-Colonial Canon. She is also the co-editor of the first multilingual volume of electronic research literature published from India. Her recent book, Practices of Digital Humanities in India, Learning by Doing, edited with Maya Dodd, looks at DH projects conceptualized and contextualized in India. She is the editor-in-chief of the journal Digital Humanities, Intersections, and serves on the editorial board of Digital Humanities Quarterly and several Routledge book series. She is the founding member of Dharati, that is Digital Humanities Alliance for Research and Teaching Innovations, has been a governing board member of ADHO, vice president of Internet, and is also serving on various national research committees. Professor Menon has published extensively in leading international journals and have led numerous nationally and internationally funded projects that advance digital and multilingual scholarship. It is now my pleasure to invite our distinguished speaker, Professor Nirmala Menon, to deliver her plenary lecture on digital knowledge infrastructures and digital humanities projects, intersections and challenges.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Tiwari. And thank you to Professor Vijay and others of the organizing team for this invite. It's a pleasure to be here. And my talk is a little bit about, research infrastructures in India, and especially research infrastructures that are, directed towards the humanities and social sciences research, which is often, in many of our national kind of missions and schemes, is often an afterthought. So I find that my job, our lab at IIT Indore, the Digital Humanities and Publishing Studies lab, was one of the first, and I think the first DH lab in India. And so I feel a certain sense of responsibility to ensure that, we keep that conversation alive. So before I start, I just want to say that everything that we do in our lab is done with my students. We have a big group of PhD students and postdoctoral fellows and, research assistants. So I want to make sure that, this is just our team, right? So what are infrastructures? An infrastructure can refer to physical objects, servers, laboratories, centers, societies, abstract representations as software or coding. In our context, we can think of infrastructures or digital humanities infrastructures as an interface between researchers, research, and resources. As Bhattacharya points out in Words in a World of Scaling Up, or Alan Liu in Towards Critical Infrastructures, we think about the right to infrastructure and the significance when it is built bottom-up as opposed to top-down. Goals and needs of research infrastructures are neither equal nor standard, and the key is to understand the infrastructural and intellectual context of our research environments. So the crucial questions for me and for our group about knowledge infrastructures, whether digital or analog, is twofold. What do these infrastructures seek to do? Who benefits from them? Who pays for them? Very important. And most importantly, who is a part of them and who is not a part of them? Uh, can different traditions be standardized across disparate global standards? Is interoperability integrative or exclusive? How and what is data governance? And how much do digital humanists know about these infrastructures? And is it an epistemological necessity for us to do so? So I'll start with my experience. In 2016 at IIT Indore, we did a 2-week digital humanities course titled Digital Humanities Tools, Texts, and Theory. These were, in my mind and in our minds, very clear and neatly classifiable categories, and we taught them as such. For the researchers who joined us from different institutions around the country, very neat lectures in each of the categories slotted separately. Today, after many lectures, workshops, keynotes, projects that many of us, me and many of my colleagues across the country, fellow researchers in DH have experienced or navigated, perhaps is a better word, these categories are not as neatly differentiated as they were in my mind in 2016. Edwards et al. In 2010 defined knowledge infrastructures as, quote, robust networks of people, artifacts, and institutions that generate, share, and maintain specific knowledge about the human and natural worlds, unquote. By this definition, knowledge infrastructures include the networks of hardware, software, and span across education, intellectual property, sustainability, publishing industry in general, scholarly publishing in particular, multilingualism, access, equity, we could go on and on. So what I want to look at here in this talk today, and I will skip through some of the slides because I don't have the time to go through each project, is what we have tried to do both in terms of developing projects from the ground up, from students, their questions, their interests, and building very slowly a research infrastructure that we think is important for digital humanities research in India, and for some larger questions about infrastructure, humanities research infrastructure in India. So the areas that we have worked on in our research group, as well as now we have a center called the JP Narayan National Center for Excellence in the Humanities, with digital humanities as one of the focus areas, is publishing and translation studies, mapping marginal narratives, spatial and cartographic studies, electronic and graphic literature, cultural heritage and digital archives, and post-colonial literature and narrative analysis. So this is like, how we look at the research group in terms of its different, different areas based on some different projects that we have done. I'll take you through some of those projects and tell you how we kind of, build those projects. So one of the projects that, we recently, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, got a publishing, a translation research analysis in Transcom journal. Scholarly publishing in India. This is something that has been very close to my heart right from the time when I established this lab, is, challenges and opportunities in scholarly publishing in India. As most of you know, we are now the fourth largest in research output, and building on what Professor Dalal was talking about, we are one of the largest university systems in the world, and we have about 1.3 million research articles published between 2017 and 2022. We are only number 9th in citation, but my investment here is to look at both the history and the challenges and opportunities for scholarly publishing in India. And I think, some of that is, we have about 6,408 active journals across databases. We have had they serve many of our researchers, but for the scale of our universities, the number is just not there. It's not even a fraction of the length there. We have to build a robust publishing ecosystem. And we still, I always say this, that we miss the train on university presses. And I think a lot of that, and we certainly miss the train on multilingual publishing, with, I would add a caveat here, with literature as being one of the exceptions. So if you look at literatures across the country in any language, you will find that there is robust scholarship, with some challenges in the sense that, there's a lot of literature, scholarship in Malayalam literature, and there's a lot of scholarship in Bengali literature and in Marathi literature, but they don't really speak to each other. So, and one of the challenges that we have in the age of AI and with, digital, is to see how we can make those conversations happen, right? So if we don't put our work out there, right? So a student in Norway who is looking at Premchand and his writing often does not have access to scholarship on Premchand being done in Hindi or Bengali or Marathi. It's only, he or she is only looking at scholarship that is done on Premchand in English, right? So we have to build multilingual publishing kind of ecosystems, and I know that there are moves towards it. Hopefully, we will get there. So this is something that we are working on. Similarly, cultural analytics of, I know I'm rushing through many of these things, but I'm happy to answer detailed questions. Cultural analytics of vernacular print in India. So they may seem disconnected, but they're actually connected, right? So we look at the history of print in India. Our specific example here is one of my students working on it is Punjab, and looking at, centers of publishing in Punjab, both pre-partition and post-partition, right? What kind of genres were being published, what kind of texts, and, what is the history of that publishing data? Why is that important? It is important because, unless we understand that, we have to, how will we kind of, build those kind of structures? There has been, for example, I invite you to look at Charu Singh. She has some amazing research on this, but she talks about the HSN glossary, that is the Hindi scholarship glossary, HSG, that was done in 1920s. This was a group of scientists from Allahabad and from Kolkata coming together to talk about, that if India and its students have to think about being part of a scientific century or of science, we need to develop a glossary in our languages, right? That was 1920, 100 years ago. Well, we seem to have kind of not really worked upon that too much, right? And that really, kind of keeps out a lot of our students. And I think a lot of the problems that Professor Dalal was also discussing is connected to that, right? That sense of ownership of having places, avenues to publish in different, in different languages in India. We really don't even have a skeleton of a system right now. And I think, we need to get there and begin to build it. So this was, bibliometrics on translation research across disciplines in India. One of the problematic, well, I shouldn't say problematic, should think of a better word, but one of the things that we learned during this research is that a lot of work on translation research in the recent years is being done by computer scientists and not enough by, literature scholars and, humanities scholars. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is, I would like to see a lot more collaboration where we are able to understand, what are some of the more nuanced readings of those kind of research. But we started on this work because, there was a recent report on as in a couple of years ago, an Indian literary system by the British Council, that presents that translation being a vast organized domain in Indian academia and non-academic fails to give a booming network of translations in India, causing a significant gap in theory and function. As often happens with British Council reports, they miss a lot of facts. And so we kind of did a network using just one example, which is Tamil translations across 100 years. Right? So this is not a close reading. This was just a kind of a macro analysis of translations being done into Tamil and out of Tamil across 100 years. And we found some really interesting analysis, so we looked at 100-year from 1913 to 2013. We looked at 6,491 records across 75 languages, 58 genres, authors, translators, publishers. The challenge is, and this is where my point about infrastructure will come in, is that a lot of this work we had to do manually because we were not able to get digitized records. We were not able to get machine readable records. So my student and my research assistants actually had to go to the archives in Chennai, get those records, put it through our scanner, make it machine readable, and then do the analysis. So we are hoping that at least this much, some other student can at least use this because we have it out there for developing more analysis, more deeper analysis from this data. But just doing that took more than a year. Right? Whereas, infrastructurally, I would think that we should have already had these things digitized. And I think, oftentimes that gap comes in because when digitization, archival work, some amazing work is going on across the country, happens, they happen at a slower pace for humanities, and textual data than it does for, say, science and for STEM fields and numerical data. And so I think that is where the challenge is. So we are still in that process. So we are trying to look at literary genres, so translations, bibliometrics, and seeing how, we can use or create data that will be useful for researchers. This is very new. I'm not going to dwell on this, but this is one of my students who is trying to look at deaf publishing and standardizing deaf sign language across Indian languages. So this is very much nascent, so I'm not going to look at it too much right now. So this is, marginal narrative, spatial and cartographic studies. One of the things, and many, you can go and check this out. It is on IIT Indore's web server, mappingmassacres.iiti.ac.in. So we look at, locating the women of independent India's Dalit massacres using feminist geocriticism and digital cartography. So we are just looking at two massacres, the Kilivamani massacre in Tamil Nadu, 1969, and the Marijapi massacre. The Marijapi massacre is scholarly wise, studied more as opposed to the Kilivamani one. But what we are trying to simply do here, we started looking at, the female survivors and where they have, moved, what are the reasons for those, displacement and movement. And the project indicates that space should be considered as an intersectional category while trying to understand the socio-cultural identity and experiences of Dalit women. And, and I think this is, again, every project that we have done is open source and open access. You're welcome to go to those websites. This was a very difficult project to do because we have to be very sensitive about the data, the people, and so, anonymize a lot of the names. So we have taken those precautions, and it is there for people to make more, analysis on, hopefully, share that work. So this is what we call it, cartographies of courage, fictional threats, real lives. And I'm not going to dwell on it. Please visit it, and I think you will get more, more information. But basically, it's a spatial database, and the digital archive is comprised of artifacts, but is in itself an artifact, creatively curated representation of representations. And by adopting interdisciplinary methods, ethical considerations and embracing emerging technologies, we can harness the power of spatial archives to preserve, interpret, and share this history, right, for future generations. Oh, why is this suddenly again not moving? What happened? I don't know why I'm having this trouble.
This is pop-up. This is pop-up. You can remove it, yeah.
What is that?
Pop-up. Yeah, pop-up is there, so it appears like a screen, a small screen.
I'm just going to keep it like this.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Women's writing from Northeast India, this was like, one of the earliest projects that we did in the lab. Looking at women's writing, and one of my first PhD student, actually, she was, she is from Nagaland, and she was looking at women writers from Nagaland. And one of the things that she was quite frustrated with is that, that whenever you look at scholarship from the Northeast, you are looking at political unrest, you are looking at anthropological narratives, ethnographic narratives, and often homogenizing its diverse ethnic and cultural context. And she wanted to kind of tell a story about the lives being lived through literature, of women of the Northeast. So, that was one of the projects that we did. Reimagining public spaces through city literature, again, mapping the concerns. We look at historical displacement and transformation of accessibility. And I'm going to go on to the next slide. And what we really did was, creation of these subaltern public spaces, right? And Delhi is the example. And some of the digitization that you see on my slide is actually my student who is an artist, and she went to these spaces in Delhi and sketched them, by hand. And what you see are recreation of her sketches. And we look at those spaces through novels written about Delhi, and then look at how those spaces look like today, and what are some of the transformations, right, both through literature and those creation of new spaces, and how that also reflects the urbanization of the city, both socially, politically, and culturally, right? So these are all kind of visual representations. So this is a project that I'm quite proud of. Electronic and graphical literature in India. And I also want to tell you through this how we kind of come to these projects. So you can go to this website, Indian E-Lit Anthology. So the reason we came to this project was that, the most well-known electronic literature anthology is ELO, Electronic Literature Anthology, Volume 1, 2, and 3 have been published. If you go, this is open access. If you go to these anthologies, we found that in the first 3 volumes of ELO, there was not a single entry from India, right? Most of it was, of course, focused on North America and Europe, but there were few examples from Japan, from Australia, not a single one from India. And that kind of got us thinking that, is it possible that, that we don't do any electronic literature? And as you can see that, we went through 4 or 5 scholarly publisher articles trying to just research this, that do we have any electronic literature at all? What are the first and second waves of Indian electronic literature? Structure and social interaction, introduction to the functioning of paratext of digital literature. And we found, as usual, that of course there is electronic literature. It was just, there were electronic literature being produced and shared between communities. So there was electronic literature being produced in Hindi and are being shared with some producers within that language, right? And then, in other languages too. In Tamil we found, in Bengali we found, in Malayalam. And so we thought, and this is how most of our projects have come into being, that, well, there is nothing like that now, let us make it. So we kind of put out a call for Indian Electronic Literature Anthology, Volume 1. And the first volume took us 4 years to publish. It was very difficult, both technologically, infrastructurally, as well as just getting the submissions and vetting them and, going through that process. And we kind of, came out with the first volume. We were still not very happy. We are still working on that now, but we're not happy with the UI design of that. And the second volume just came out, couple of months ago, and I think which is a much better volume. But one of the things that we are proud of is that this electronic literature volume from India, Volume 1 and 2, are both not just open access, but they're not just born digital, but they're also born multilingual. So, both of them have contributions from at least 4 different languages, and we have published them as a single volume. I keep having this issue today. I don't know why. I'm just going to go and so for lack of time, I'm just going to skip through a few. So this is a project that is part of our digital, cultural preservation archive. Can you see this?
If there is not much, you may please continue without avoiding skipping.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm just looking at the time. So, so this is like, a project that we are currently doing, and I have almost finished. This is looking at Sindhi narratives post-partition. So this was again a project that we came upon, just looking at Sindhi writers, female writers, again, women writers, that one of my PhD students is working on. And one of the things that we realized is that, that a lot of the post-partition Sindhi works were written sometimes in refugee camps, some, and were amazing works. But my student, who is a 3rd generation Sindhi, who are part of the group that migrated to India after partition, had adopted across the community, for a major part of the community, adopted the Devanagari script, right? While Sindhi, immediately post-partition, pre-partition, was in the Perso-Arabic script, right? So a lot of the Sindhi community in India does not have access or have learned the Perso-Arabic script, right? So they did not have access to these texts and did not, really kind of engage with it. So we were thinking about, what can we do about that? And so we kind of put together a project for DST, Department of Science and Technology, and we worked with the Indian Institute of Sindhology in Kutch, who had an amazing repository of rare manuscripts. And so we kind of worked with them and identified 100 rare manuscripts of Sindhi literature post-partition. And we have created an audio archive of those manuscripts. So that is still not in public yet, but it will be within a month or so. And we have called the project Sindhu. And this is simply an annotation, a digitization of those texts along with an audio archive, right? So you can actually listen to the text like a audible book, but you can also kind of go through the digitized text too. And so this was again, quite a fascinating and a challenging project for us. And we are in the final stages of, releasing that project. We hope to do that very soon. But it was a huge learning exercise, when we also realized that some of the big language infrastructures that we have in India, like Bhashini, for example, at IIT Madras, or Bharat AI, sometimes don't include many of these languages. So it is try to include the scheduled languages, but Sindhi is one of the scheduled languages, but Sindhi in the Bhashini project, for example, is in the Perso-Arabic script, not in the Devanagari script. And so, the community will need to work with those infrastructures and see, or scholars, and see how we can kind of integrate the script with the language models that are being created. Again, I say that because, I'm always thinking infrastructure these days. It's kind of my pet peeve. So again, we came to this through writing about it, thinking about it. As you can see, this is our process. And it also goes back to what, I keep thinking about what Professor Dalal was speaking about, is, cognitive thinking. So when people ask me about digital humanities, I always say that, my questions really have not changed as a humanities scholar. What I used to think about, what I used to worry about as a literature scholar about translations, is still the questions that continue to engage me. But if there are digital tools or the ways in which I can harness those tools to make that research better, I would like to do that. And so that is how we develop these projects. And that is the reason I show you the evolvement of those projects, because they didn't start off as wanting to do a fancy project. They started off as identifying a gap and thinking that, how can we do it? Looking for someone else who may have done it, not finding it, and then saying that, okay, let's do it. So some of them have been successful. Usually I also talk about some of our failures, which we have not been able to complete. I don't have the time for it today, but I always say to my colleagues and friends that we should have like a dead projects, portal, just like we have like Dead Poets Society, right? So projects that died because of lack of technology or lack of compatibility or lack of support, both in terms of resources as well as in terms of, technology. So, that's a whole different talk. This is also part of that. It came out of that same project because they also have a huge repository of, folk songs. So we have kind of creating this is still in the making, Sindhi Sanchaya, which is documenting those. It's a more multimedia thing, both audio, video, testimonials, and so on. Right. Post-colonial deterritorialization, digital migration. So we are looking at, this is very much a very traditional post-colonial work, looking at, digitizing stories and looking at migration stories and looking at how, migration stories over a period of time, what is the flow of migration in those literatures? Because oftentimes, if you look at post-colonial literature, migration is often discussed only in transatlantic terms. So I think, if you look at someone like Amitav Ghosh, who, is someone that I read very closely, and, see the shift in oceans, and see what kind of different migration stories are there. And we are trying to, kind of work on that. So all of this is, part of our way. And like I said, I'm going to also skip through a few others, I'll just go through the small one, which is another early stepwise analysis of technology as literary artifacts. So we just looked at, it was a fun project to do, and one of our early projects with one of my students, Dr. Shanmuga. And we looked at, the artifacts in select post-independence Indian English novels. So we looked at how, by the way, when I say these projects or I look at these visualizations, I am in no way saying that some of these projects or some of these discourses have not already happened as theoretical discourses, right? And we have looked at the role of technology or the role of a telephone or a radio and television and computers in different novels at different times, how those technologies have functioned in literature. Right? What some of these tools allow us to do is to give a visualization that sometimes corroborates that kind of theoretical analysis, sometimes contests it, and sometimes offers new insights into understanding that. So all of that, working through many of these projects led us to develop this platform called IIT CHIP, which is Knowledge Sharing in Publishing, which is an open access, which is an open access publishing platform, which is a consortium of open access publishing from universities around the world. And we are part of a consortium under Ubiquity Press. And, we try here, this has been a very challenging project, and I still won't call it like, we are there yet, but we have used that platform to make sure that our projects and our publishing initiatives are open access, because they are supported by IIT Indore for its infrastructure, and make it open to anyone in India. And if someone has a question, I can say why I underline that, because a lot of archives, a lot of databases across the world in global scholarship often happen to be behind paywalls, and they are often not accessible to my students or your students across India. And this is why I keep underlying the need for developing infrastructures located, the location and the site of those infrastructures, trust me, are very important. I could elaborate more, but I think they are so crucial. And I can tell you about certain archives that have become very difficult for us to access. They are available at a price, and that price is often expensive. So this is one of the things that we have done recently, and we have just published the first volume. We launched the Digital Humanities Intersections, the first journal of DHI from Digital Humanities from India, and we launched it last year. The first issue was published this year. You can go, it is an open access journal again, and it is got we are using the Public Knowledge Project, PKP's network OJS infrastructure currently for this journal. We want to look at this journal both as an intellectual as well as an infrastructural experiment. So right now, it is using PKP's OJS infrastructure. We hope to experiment with different infrastructures and develop our own OJS if possible in the coming volumes. We also look to making translation as well as publishing in other Indian languages as a given or as part of this journal. And just wish us luck on that. So we are just, like I said, it is new. All right. So this is like, all of that work led to the JPN National Center of Excellence in the Humanities, of which, digital humanities is one of the focus areas. And in that, this is, I'm the chair of this center. One of the things we were able to do through generous funding from the Ministry of Education is to be able to fund almost 35 to 40 projects across India in digital humanities. We are not doing those projects. We have had a call for proposals. People have put proposals, and we have funded them, not huge amounts, small amounts, but enough to let them to start working on the projects that they're interested in. And there's some amazing work happening. People, the intention, the intellect, as well as the kind of inspiring ideas that come from faculty and researchers and students from across universities. And I've given talks at many places who don't have the resources, right? National universities, some of the elite universities, along with the IITs and ISERs, may have some funding. Many of these universities really need to be funded and need to be supported for the kind of work that they are, that they are doing. So I'm a huge advocate of these public universities doing whatever they can with the constraints and with the resources that they get. Right. So internationally federated interoperable structures like Clarin, Daria, they demonstrate sustainable models for open, multilingual, and community-driven research infrastructures. We do not have that yet for humanities in India. Recently, the JPN Center has been recognized as Clarin ERIC, like, EU's humanities research, as a knowledge center. So we are now a K center for Clarin. But through that center, we hope to put out resources of multilingual tools for doing research for Indian languages out there, and we'll be developing it slowly. You can still go up and look at the Clarin India K Center. We call it the Clarin Lipi, or Language Infrastructures and Publishing Innovation, Clarin Lipi for India. So that is just a small step, and we hope at some point that, either we or someone else will have a full-fledged, DARIA kind of infrastructure for humanities research in India. Right. So you look at all of these projects, there are some great projects happening, like the Bhashini project, Sarvam AI, Saral AI, and many of these do kind of take off from science and engineering projects, and that is great. But I think we need to see how we can work with the PIs and, the scholars working on these projects, and see how we integrate humanities research and humanities needs into these projects. So recently, we have just started working on this, on exactly some of these things, using what we call links, which is an ANRF project, which I've just started. And we want to integrate many of these models, right? So what are some of the challenges in DH projects in India? The problem of scale without infrastructure. We have siloed archives, no shared standards, and we are often invisible to the world. So this is often my, what I always worry about. So this is like, how we have kind of tried to build it. And at the center and as the group. And that is why, having done small projects with small amounts of money, and creating small databases, small analysis, network analysis, using tools that are available, tweaking some of the tools. And I have had fantastic students, which is just my luck being at an IIT. And they are really the backbone of all of this work. And from doing that and then doing workshops and training, we have kind of tried to look at now, developing infrastructures that can be useful for, for everyone. So as I say, and I'm going to, close and wait, and I can answer questions from all of you. That what the above examples demonstrate is that the diversity of disciplines, projects, and motivations constituting what we argue is a digital humanities landscape in India makes it organically transdisciplinary, promising the, quote, the methodological and social diversity, unquote, found wanting in Anglo-American DH, as Alan Liu points out in 2018. I have cited only a few examples from numerous projects. And as you can see, the projects that I have cited are mostly the projects we have done, in my lab. But there are also projects, across the country, spanning history, economics, literature, translation studies, artificial intelligence, NLP-based projects, and so on. If DH as an umbrella term is to have a role in India, it must be one of documenting, harnessing, and facilitating these kinds of works and projects, as well as empowering their access to resources, both capital and academic, to ensure that engagement with the digital is rewarding and incentivized within academia at large. The labor and intellectual rigor involved in developing digital archives and repositories has to be recognized as legitimate research output and not merely as appendages or ancillaries to real humanistic thinking. And I say this from experience because, we have often come across that. Making involves theorizing and doing. These components are inseparable if we are to understand the complex networks of the digital, the analog, and the human. In his essay, The Computational Turn, Thinking About Digital Humanities, David Berry points out that computational technology has become the very condition and possibility required in order to think about many of the questions in the humanities today. Berry quotes Hofstadter's differentiation between intellect and intelligence and calls for a digital intellect as opposed to digital intelligence. This underlines a very important shift from computational humanities to digital humanities. I try to make the argument that The ontological exploration of DH in India has only begun. What these case studies demonstrate is that in the process of building and tooling, each of these projects develop an individual intellect that emerges from the intelligent task at hand. Rather than rush to either work in borrowed metaphors that may or may not work for the larger body of DH work across the post-colonial space that is India, or even push to pitch tents or markers with still evolving ontology, digital pedagogy, and training in India should simply let diverse projects develop their own narrative intellect. These varied intellects will in time give us theoretical and conceptual vocabulary that is organic and will invest the pedagogy in the coming decade with much needed clarity and conviction and and conception. Digital humanities in India is a journey, a data point that is part of a cosmic but network chaos. As scholars who work in intersectional identities of the digital and humanities, those data points are marked with a lot of support, mentoring, learning, and unlearning. And what we cannot afford is that, already there are people, to ensure that we take as many people as we can into that digital tent, because there are already narratives that marginalize large groups and of people and students. So how do we kind of bridge the gap without losing sight of the questions that drive us there? Thank you, and I'll take questions.
Thank you, Professor Menon, for your rich and stimulating presentation. And we can only say on behalf of the participants and organizers that some extraordinary and outstanding work is being done at IIT Indore under your leadership along with the team that you have. However, we stand in solidarity with your call for more infrastructures, both in terms of infrastructure as well as in terms of funding. Thank you, Professor Menon.